Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this webinar, which is part of the Grooming and Coercive Control Summit 2023, hosted by Neurodiverse Connection. If you haven't heard of us before, Neurodiverse Connection is a community interest company that exists to elevate the voices of neurodivergent people to help them flourish and thrive. The Grooming and Coercive Control Summit is our first ever event series, so we're delighted that you've chosen to join us and be part of this. Our aim for this summit is to start conversations, collate knowledge, and share lived experiences of grooming and coercive control. This is an issue that affects many lives, but is rarely talked about openly, and we believe that challenging the stigma that surrounds it can help accelerate positive change in this critical area. Before we start today, I have a few housekeeping remarks. This webinar will be followed by a live Q&A session with Warda. We'll try and get through as many of your questions as possible. At Neurodiverse Connection, we're committed to promoting the use of neurodivergent affirming language. Our guide to neurodivergent affirming language is available in our resource library. However, please note that in these webinars, as with any content we host or share that has input from other organisations or parties, we can't guarantee that the preferred neurodivergent affirming terminology is always used. Due to the very nature of the summit, there's a content warning for all our webinars on grooming, abuse, and coercive control. Please find a link to a list of support organisations that we've compiled in the chat. This webinar will be delivered by Warda Farah. Warda is an autistic speech and language therapist specialising in inclusive policy review and implementation. She's a clinical communication expert who's passionate about helping to create equitable and inclusive environments. Through personal anecdotes, research findings, and community narratives, this talk explores the multifaceted challenges faced by autistic individuals, particularly those compounded by intersectionality. We'll delve into the critical issues of grooming, from sexual abuse to involvement in county drug lines, and the vulnerabilities that can arise within familial, friendly, and romantic relationships. Warda, delighted to hand over to you now.
Thank you so much, Jill. And I'd really like to thank Neurodiverse Connections for putting together, I think, something that is so needed, never spoken about, can seem a bit taboo, and sometimes is very difficult stuff to speak about, both for people that are autistic or people just in general in our society. So I really applaud you all for putting this together, and thank you to the people that have attended. I always usually start everything I do with a positionality statement. I think a bio is really good because it might give you a little bit more background about me, but a positionality statement will give you a more personal and intimate view of who I am and why I think the way I think and why I do the work that I do. So I'll just read it out to you. So I'm a Black neurodivergent woman of East African heritage. My paternal roots are from Ethiopia and my maternal roots are from Somalia. I was initially raised in South London as a young child in a predominantly working class urban area. Despite my parents' extensive educational background in East Africa, they arrived in London fleeing a civil war and were asylum seekers who took jobs in the hospitality industry before studying and retraining in a professional capacity. This resulted in my family moving when their finances improved, resulting in me spending my teenage years in a more affluent part of South London. I spent much of my childhood in between the margins, not fully belonging in either locations or spaces I inhabited. My educational experiences range from being labelled gifted and talented by my school to also being expelled from classes and being told that my writing and thinking practices always miss the mark. As a multilingual speech and language therapist and educator, my work is keen to interrogate the impact of anti-Blackness and ableism on the people that I work with and the practitioners. So I suppose the topic description, there's so many things to talk about and kind of get into, and I've labeled it as, I first wanted to begin with the power of storytelling. Then I wanted to get a little bit more personal and tell you some of my stories. And then I say our stories because I'm going to share some stories which I have permission to share, which are people that I have either worked with or are my family members, and they're happy for me to share it, and they're our stories because I've also been involved with them. And then I think about our future, because I always like to end things on a positive, hopeful note for, you know, a future that is better than the one that we currently have. So that's the kind of rundown of what we'll be doing today. I always pretext everything I do by talking about the power of storytelling, because more powerful than any research paper I've ever read or any documentary I've ever watched, when people have the opportunity to share their stories, tell you about themselves, give you insight into their world, which allows you to understand different perspectives, which allows you to experience for a moment someone else's reality. I think it's really powerful. And I think it's a powerful testimony that makes us think a bit more, or maybe feel a bit more, where we might realize that actually we have some commonalities. Often, many times in my life when I've shared my story, I thought I was the only person. I thought I was the only person going through this, and I thought it was only me. And when I shared my story, many people came to me and told me that they themselves had the same experiences that I had. So this is why I really do believe that telling stories is really powerful. This is why I also believe that even though in my professional capacity, I'm a speech language therapist and a university lecturer, I never lose the ability to be vulnerable and share my truths with people, because, you know, ultimately that's what helps me heal and that's what helps me connect. So as I share parts of my story with you, which are very, very intimate, personal, and private, I want you to consider some of your own life stories, things that you have experienced, whether some of these stories resonate with you. There's also something really important to talk about, which is the context and the background for this. Often the intersectional experiences of Black and minoritized autistic people are always at the back. They're never at the foreground. They're never really told, and we never really hear about them. Yeah. Sometimes it feels as if we're tokens and our stories are just there to you know, to be either, you know, picked apart or used as evidence or etc. But what I want you to really know and consider is those who are racialized and pathologized have a unique lived experience, and that their needs are not adequately addressed by either community. And this is really important to say, because there are many Black and brown autistic people who are having similar experiences, whether it's mental health difficulties, whether it's issues, any kind of social issue. And these are multiplied by being racialized. So by virtue of the background that you come from, the impact of what you experience is multiplied. So we don't, and I don't just deal with the fact that I am an autistic neurodivergent person living in this society. I'm a Black autistic neurodivergent person living in this society. And at times it's been hard for me to understand or comprehend or be able to pick apart what my experiences are in totality. Did I just experience racism? Did I just experience ableism? I don't know. Sometimes it's a mix of both. Sometimes it's none. But these things are so interwoven and interconnected and so hard to pull apart that it's difficult to have this conversation without considering the context of a person's cultural background and identity and how they exist in this world, and how this can have a real impact on them. And some of the stories that I'm going to share are really about being at the intersections of race and disability, you know. So I always, you know, as I said, I'm going to talk a little bit about myself. I found out I was autistic in my 30s. I went through the majority of my school life not knowing. I thought that there were things wrong with me, and I tried to read up about them and figure out what it was, and I could never figure it out. And the people around me, my educators, my family, everybody had a label for me from, from a very young age. People told me that, that I was problematic or lazy, that I was too chatty, that I was a bit silly sometimes, and people would laugh. And I was thinking, no, but I'm not being silly. I'm trying to understand. I was told I need to apply myself more. I also, and going back to being literal, it's very interesting because I remember growing up and having a best friend or best friends, and I really believed that we were best friends. I thought best friends is something that you have forever and all these kind of tropes. And so from a very early age, I would I would, well, I would be labeled as what you would say is naive. So I was an intelligent child who was naive. And I was naive because things I had never experienced before, I never knew whether it was bad or good or what it was. I never really had a sense of a strong sense of self because I was always feeling confused about my identity. And now in my 30s, I'm not confused about my identity, but I understand why. I understand that my early childhood experiences in the education system started me off on a shaky foundation. Yeah. And none of that was my fault. I couldn't focus in class because there was always too much noise. I couldn't focus on the tasks that I was given because they were of no interest to me. I did not want to read the books that I was given to read because I had my own books that I like to read. And all of these things was seen as negative when I was an inquisitive child, a child that was adaptable and open to learning, a child who had abilities and talents that were never honed in on. And I started to feel like I'm just not good enough no matter what I do. Sorry about that. So I started to feel like I'm not good enough no matter what I do. So I started to think, well, who can I be then? If I can't be me, who can I be? And luckily for me, or I don't know if it was lucky, I had a best friend in primary school, and she was the most popular girl in school, but for some reason she really liked me. We really got on. And then I learned that by having someone around me that was better at the things that I was told I wasn't good at, it masked me. And that's where my masking began. I don't know where I got the idea from. I don't know how it happened, but I learned that through other people, I could be safe if they were around me. They could take some of the responsibility for me. So from very early on, I had friends that would help me with my homework, friends that would let me copy their homework. I had friends who would, things that I might have struggled with, they would support me and help me, sometimes to the detriment of the teachers being upset, like, why are you helping Warda? And I go back to this and I think about now, often we talk about so much of the experiences of bullying and all the horrible things that are going on in school. But I remember children that maybe knew that something was different about me, but they didn't care. They helped me. They liked me, even when I didn't like myself. So just kind of going back to the point of that's where my masking journey began. And I used to, what I quickly learned was if I do what my teachers tell me, if I do what my peers expect of me, if I do what my parents want, then I'll be okay. I'll be safe. I won't be, I won't be verbally abused or put down. I won't feel, worthless or stupid. Everyone will like me and everything will be okay. And that worked. That worked for a period of time until I went to secondary school and I started going through my own emotional, hormonal, physical changes, new people, a bigger school. Suddenly the nice people at primary school were no longer there. I was now with other children, sometimes quite mean, other children who could see my differences and weren't so kind about them, you know? I can remember instances of jokes being told and I never got it. And sometimes I would even pretend to laugh, you know, so and sometimes I still do that now. I'll just, if everyone's laughing, okay, I'll pretend to laugh too. So these things have huge impact. And the point why I'm kind of detailing some of these things is because I myself, as I'm trying to work around my history and figure myself out and kind of understand myself more, I was an intelligent, empathetic, caring child and person who was really open to the world. But my traits, my ways of being were often seen with such hostility, and it confused me. And the reason I've picked this photo in particular, it's not that I don't have any other better childhood photos. That's what my approach to life was. My arms crossed and my face looking kind of puzzled, right? That was my face all the time. And I got into trouble for this face as well. I got into trouble for doing this face a lot. So what I'm saying here is my school experience, my experience with my peers, my experiences in my home with my own family made me not feel very good about myself. And I made friends with people that made me feel good about myself, to the point where I gave them blind faith and trust because I thought I was safe. So there's instances of me doing some really, really stupid things, like shoplifting, when I didn't need to shoplift, right? Because my friends told me to do it. And I remember being, you know, apprehended. I wasn't quite arrested because I think it was a Woolworths or a WH Smith, and I didn't really take anything that was of huge value. But I did it because my best friends told me to do it. And when I got home and my parents spoke to me, they said, how stupid could you be? Why would you do that? And I couldn't answer it. I did it because my friends told me to, and my friends were doing it too. And I was, sorry again. And I was a part of them. So some of these literal parts of my personality where I would go to an extreme, you know, if someone was my best friend, we were like ride or die, we would do everything together, you know? And so instances of being expelled. I didn't want to be expelled from school, but I would do what everybody else was doing, right? So I didn't have a personality of my own. My personality was an amalgamation of the people around me. And I acted for so long that by the time I was 30 and I found out I was autistic, I asked myself, who the hell are you? You don't know who you are, because everything you like, everything that you dislike, everything that you do is based around other people. You haven't had that time to develop and really grow and think about who you are and what you like and what your choices are and that autonomy. But I am happy to say that now I do. And I really like who I am. So the teenage years are difficult years. When my friends were so I'll just go back to, so when I started year 7, I was put into a program called Gifted and Talented. They told me I was gifted and talented. By the end of year 7, they had kicked me out of Gifted and Talented because I wasn't doing the things that they expected me to do. I fell into, I wouldn't even say it was a wrong crowd. I would say it was the available crowd. It was what was around in my area. These were the people that were around me. And I started to hang out with friends who were not attending school or getting into trouble or, you know, truancy, meeting up with the local boys who actually, interestingly enough, were older. You know, these are things that people don't speak about, these like experiences that you have as a child. But then when you're an adult, you look back and you go, oh my God, that was so inappropriate. How did that happen? So when I talk about these experiences, and it's really important to pretext that my early experiences in the education system, by the teachers, by the people around me, made me feel like I had no sense of confidence, pride, self-esteem, worth, ability, that I could ever be anything. right? That meant it was easier for people to tell me when I grew up that when someone told me they liked me or they valued me, I couldn't believe it. And I was so enamored by the fact that, oh, wow, someone likes me, that I would go along and do whatever they wanted me to do. And you can see the danger of that, right? And there are many instances in my life, which I won't really go into detail, in which I've not been safe. I've not been safe. And sometimes I've known, like, in the back of my mind, what am I doing? But I had this people-pleasing trait that even when something wrong was happening, I would go along with it. Because once again, that early defining foundational experiences that I had were ones of, you're never right, you're not right anyways. So that's how I grew up. That's how I developed. These are the relationships I had, with friends. They weren't real relationships. They weren't real friendships. Many a time in my life I have been used. And I know there are many people that have got similar stories, and you don't know that you're being used until you're used up. And you think to yourself, how did that happen? I'll learn from that. That will never be me again. And then it happens again. And it was only when I worked out, well, every time I learn that something can happen, I register that. But then something new happens with someone new who is totally different, in a different environment, in a different context. And so that would confuse me, and I was on a loop of the same behaviors. I would have friends and we would fall out all the time, and I couldn't work out why I was falling out with people, what the issues were, and you just get into a lot of self-blame. Self-blame gets you into relationships with people that are not good for you. Self-blame gets you into spaces that are not safe for you. And self-blame makes you feel like you have no value. So you get very depressed. So what this really slide signifies is that, I mean, I'm a lot better now than I was, but these early experiences that we have, that we give to our children, can be really, really damaging. And I know that there are a lot of autistic people out there of a similar age to me, older than me, that look back at their life with so much guilt, shame, regret, but it's not their fault. And so it also led me to the question of, how comes nobody ever diagnosed my autism? How comes it never came to the attention of anybody? It was something that I had to figure out and find out for myself in my 30s. And this is a quote from a blog that I wrote, and it says, maybe autism in Black girls manifests how it manifests in white girls, but you do not see us. So this is the intersectional experience. As much as I'm talking about the pain of my early childhood experiences, the pain of being neurodivergent and autistic and existing in this world that's not built for me, there is also the element of my race that I contend with, right? And it's so important that we think about this when we're talking about people and their experiences, especially their experiences with exploitation, of grooming, of violence, all manner of things. Don't forget that people exist in the margins, at the intersections, in which where services and treatments or anything like that may not even be tailored to them, to their cultural linguistic experiences. I never had a safe space to go to. I never had a safe place to speak of these experiences. And so we want to create, I think this is why it's really good that we have this summit, so we can not only think about supporting all autistic people, but those in the group, those of us in this community who are significantly more marginalized by other forms of isms. So really important to remember my experiences in the context of my racial background. So I said I was going to share some other people's stories and pretext it with my own. So my own stories is my own personal story is one of bad friendships, grooming, whether it's a relationship of coercive control when I was younger, to not being able to talk to people at work, you know, people at work maybe bullying me, or like not being able to deal with things in a certain way. So I have a lot of these experiences. But while I was going through my own experiences, I was working with young people who were also going through the same experiences as me. And when I was working with these people, I made a decision that actually I'm here to change their trajectory. They don't have to experience what I experienced. So in some ways, working with these young people, there's a sadness that nobody ever did it for me, but there's also a joy and a hope that I can help and support someone else by seeing their complex, multifaceted, intersectional identity, by understanding what it feels like to be autistic and seeing that world from that lens, but also knowing the issues that they may have, by helping them to identify and to spotlight them early and support them and give them the confidence, the self-esteem, the sense of self, the pride that was never given to me. So I worked with a young boy called Jay. Jay's currently in prison, right? And he'll be in prison for the next couple of years. He went to prison when he was 15, right? And I was working with him before this. The quotes that you have here are not ones that I've made for him. These are from his reports from school, right? His school described him as very bad, as confrontational, has failed to make a successful transition to secondary school. He has an unwillingness to engage with support. He's at risk of permanent exclusion. He's disruptive to the learning of others. He's unable to self-regulate. He is challenging, angry, and disruptive. Yeah? When I met Jay, he was none of those things. He was a kind boy, actually, quite misunderstood. And it was very clear to me that he was neurodivergent in some capacity. It was clear to me that there were miscommunications going on in his environment. He wasn't disruptive, angry, or rude. He was overstimulated. Sensory, the noise, the changing of the changing of the rules suddenly, the uncomfortableness that he had in his school uniform because he didn't like the way that it felt. The school saying that he couldn't have his dreadlocks anymore and had to get rid of them, right? Huge changes, huge changes. And so when I met Jay, it was clear to me that, you know, he was potentially autistic. And so we had to and wrote a report and, you know, got the referrals through, and he got his diagnosis. But before he got his diagnosis, Jay was groomed by a local gang. And he was told to throw over some mobile phones, some SIM cards, and some drugs over a prison wall. When his mother rang me to tell me what had happened, we both spoke to each other and said, how could that happen? He knows better than that. Who do such a thing? There are people out there that groom, that are predatory, that know that some people have certain traits and will use those traits. So as much as we talk about autistic awareness and all these things, there are people that analyze people's behavior and are very good at persuading people to do things that they wouldn't usually do. And these people often target those people who have difficulties or differences. And so the point of this story is, before Jay was arrested and this incident happened, he was permanently excluded before they could even put the provision in. Yeah, the provision of speech and language therapy, the sensory the sensory integration or the environmental adaptations, the giving him a mentor or someone, a safe person that he can talk to. He didn't have any of those things, and he was so susceptible and easy to groom. And now he's in a youth offending prison, right? His life is not very good at the moment. And it's hard for people to understand, why would somebody do something like that? But we need to really understand that when we damage children's sense of self, their pride, the way they feel about themselves, the way they think, their autonomy, they're susceptible to all forms of abuses. And we, instead of safeguarding them, we punish them when these things happen to them. So I just would like us to really take a moment in time to think about ourselves. And in some ways, a lot of us have been lucky that we've made it through. I know that I'm very privileged and lucky to have been in some of the situations that I've been in, and some would call it make it, get out. I'd like to also pretext that by saying I am a person of community, and my saving grace was the elders in my community, the women who were my friends, who guided me, and who actually, interestingly, were neurodivergent themselves, but never knew it. And they're, in their 50s and 60s and only getting diagnoses now. Those are the people that helped me navigate my life. And whenever I needed advice and say, this has just happened, does that make sense to you? And they would just give me the right advice. There's such an onus on us in this society to have the answers for ourselves. Like, there's this whole thing that we're supposed to figure it out because that's part of our learning process. Well, I learn through people, trusted, safe people with good judgment, helping me out to make a decision. I actually need that. As intelligent and as able as I am to do the things that I'm doing, unfortunately, I need that. And I've been lucky enough to have that. And I think that it really speaks to the importance of why I go into schools and I support children, because in case they don't have that person in their community that is going to not only listen to them, but also guide them, has a lived experience, has had these situations, and you can learn from that person's narrative that they tell you, almost in a social story-esque way. That's how I've learned, and that's how I've managed to navigate. Yeah. So this slide is really about us thinking about our future and how we want to move forward. And I dream of a world where we subvert from current theory and models of practice. And what I mean by that is these medicalized models, these unhelpful pathologies, these systems and environments that are not conducive for our mental health, our physical health, our well-being. They're not good for autistic people, but they're also not good for all people. And so we should really be thinking about, how do we subvert from this current theory and models of practice and create our own? So, for example, even having this discussion today, sharing my story with you, sharing Jay's story with you, this should help us start thinking about things that are needed and things that we can do and models of practice that we may be able to follow to, in some ways, stop grooming and stop these abuses from happening. I love the work of Ophelia Garcia. If anybody hasn't read her work, I would suggest that you do. Her work is basically in the sociolinguistics field, but there's so much to learn from her, especially if you're thinking about kind of like the autistic of the affirming paradigms. A lot of that comes from some of her work. And she says we must reject abysmal thinking that does not serve us, that does not help us, thinking that makes us feel blamed, that makes us feel like we're the ones that are broken, when actually the system doesn't even cater to us at all. So we have to be confident and proud and collectively get together and have conferences like this where we reject abysmal thinking and we think about new models of practice. We need to center lived experience. I think testimony, storytelling, people coming together is so powerful because it makes you feel like you're not alone. And if I'm going through it and you're going through it and they're going through it, what are we going to do about it? And lastly, I really, really want you to connect with the idea, to understand the effect of interlocking oppressions on racialized autistic people. My story, Jay's story, it doesn't have to be that way. But think about the impact of racialization can have on our experiences. We're not suffering from just ableism, we're suffering from racism and all forms of isms, and it's coming together and it's in policy and it's all around us. And sometimes we feel like we can't breathe. So please, as our allies, think and consider about those other people in the autistic community that have a whole host of other identities that cause them difficulty. And I'd really like to thank everybody for listening to my story. I don't like to, make it all about me and talk about me, but I think that the greatest way to learn is through someone sharing what they've been through and what they're doing now. And so I hope that it was really useful to everybody. Thank you so much. And we can have questions now.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm so moved, Warda, listening to you share your experience. Thank you for your presence and thank you for your visibility. It was a really beautiful and poetic talk. I really value your openness and your vulnerability, and I see the power of you sharing your story and your experience. And I love the photo of young you. I'm such a fan of that. Thank you for including it. I also want to say I'm so grateful for your presence on our team and for your leadership, and for the contribution you make to our monthly Black Autistic meetup. Yeah, I'm so grateful for your contribution today and for the work that you do with us. So I've got a few questions, and we've had a few questions coming in as well. I want to start with, do you have any suggestions for how services, so schools, support services, domestic violence services, police, for how services can differently and better understand culture and context? If someone's just starting out and wants to do better on this, what suggestions might you have for them?
Thank you so much, Jill. This is really hard. I think a lot of people have to do some self-study and connect with, if there is a group in your organization that is interested in understanding this, then they're always good to connect with. But also look outside of your organization to people who are actively doing this work and try to find a way to connect with them, either by attending a session they're hosting, getting a book that they have, or any of those kind of, like, there's always kind of like networking opportunities. So there are people around that can help with that. So you've just got to know where to look. I think the other piece about that is, I think we often overcomplicate things, because I personally believe, and if this may not be true, that all anybody wants to be done is to be treated humanely. And if you think with that in mind, how can I treat this person with kindness, respect, humility, and humanely? I don't think you can get it wrong. I think anything that you don't know, you can ask, because that's how you learn. And people are happy to share with you. Oh, actually, my background is this, so we like to do this. Often people are afraid to share with professionals and stuff like, because they don't know that is on the agenda, that actually by sharing, they don't know that that's a welcomed thing. So by actually setting the conversation and saying, just tell me a little bit more about you and etc., you can do that by developing that relationship. But I think the key thing that we have to remember is, the reason why we have to have all this kind of like cultural competency in this and that is because our services are not treating people humanely. And so just kind of hark back to that and just think, what would humane treatment be? How can I deal with this person?
Thanks, Warda. And I think, you know, bringing some of my experience into this is I find partnerships. Like I look for people that I can share the platform with, that I can work alongside, who I can support and contribute. And like, yeah, our work together, I think, is one example of that. Actually, I don't have the answers and I don't have the experience, and sometimes the gift I can give is to move out of the way and to create space for somebody who is better placed to lead some of that work and some of those conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering, do you have any um, additional thoughts or suggestions for people who are involved in early education? So you spoke really beautifully and eloquently about how challenging you found actually more secondary school, but how some of these um, patterns emerged in your education and how you are viewed, and the language that people use to describe you and may use to describe others. For early educators who might get limited input from the children that they're working with, do you have any suggestions for how they can be better allies and supporters?
I think I'm not going to answer this very well, but I think just by educating yourself and engaging with, there's some really great people doing some amazing work, like Liz Pemberton does a lot of work on kind of like anti-blackness or racial literacy. There are, Professor Eunice Lumsden at Northampton, she does a lot of type of work on this. Yeah, so I think my advice is really just take the lead and find these places, these partnerships, and try to connect with them. I think the idea is you don't always want to sounds really run before you walk, the ableist, but you want to take your time to embed, and you need to really think about actually these things. I think often we're so quick to rush to a toolkit or a strategy without fully thinking about what it is that we're trying to do, who it is that we're trying to help, and actually how are we going to do that. Sometimes a lot of people have good intentions to be helpful and end up creating a lot of harm, and it's not intentional. So I think be really careful and think about what it is that you're trying to do, who you're trying to help, and then maybe speak to people that are already doing this work, because you don't have to reinvent the wheel. I hope that was something.
Thanks, Warda. Yeah, and the other thing that I heard really powerfully and clearly in what you shared was the power of a strengths-based approach. Like, actually, we don't have to know all the answers, but we can see the gifts and we can see the strengths. Like, we can see how determined some people are, or we can see the gift, and sometimes by even just turning our language and refocusing our attention to the gifts that someone has, I think can change the dynamics of a relationship. Okay.
I agree with you. I agree.
It came through loud and clear in your presentation. And do you have any suggestions? This is another question that's come in. Any suggestions of how to support an autistic teenager who's academically talented but struggling with friendship, which is contributing to self-harming?
I see this. I see this a lot, and this is why I talk so much about self-esteem and confidence and sense of self. And it's difficult. But if this person is at school, hopefully, the SEN department or the SENCO, etc. There should, this is why there should always kind of be one or two safe people, like mentors. A lot of the young people that I work with have developed such great relationships with their LSAs or the people in their schools that are their one-to-ones. I'm not saying that it's always possible for everybody, but I have seen that when they have even one person that they may relate to or connect with or is safe, they will go to that person and kind of offload on them. But also what that person can do is facilitate relationships with others and create opportunities for some form of mixing that is useful for that child. So I think this is definitely something that can be worked with with the school, because you can't, you can't do it. And I think also sometimes it's like, sometimes people have difficulties making friends, and they want to make friends, and so I think that that's different to somebody not wanting to make any friends and kind of, not being okay, but that's not what leads them. So what I would definitely say is, if the person is not wanting to make friends, then somebody in the school that's like a LSA, that is a safe person that they trust, that they like, is good to start springboarding relationships. And it's hard because, now it's I mean, like, making friends is really hard. I don't and I don't think there's an easy way to necessarily teach people how to make friends, but what I do know is that if you have a sense of self and a sense of pride in yourself, and you start to like who you are, I think it shows. So it would be really, before even developing friendships with other people, what I would be considering for this child is, how do they feel about their own self when they're by themselves? So when you start to like yourself, you like hanging out with yourself. So I'm sorry if that's not super detailed for you, but I would definitely say, some opportunities for this young person to be with somebody that values them and shows them how gifted they are, and then springboard that onto other opportunities as and when they are ready.
Thanks, Warda. Yeah, great suggestions there, and I think I so agreed with your focus on strengths and looking at building them up and supporting them to feel better and confident in themselves. If I could make a couple of extra suggestions, one is to look at their interests. So I, for a long time, had quite a traditional idea of friendship and was like, oh, like this looks like friends, or this looks like the L word, like this has to be a group of people. But actually, for many of us, we're better on a one-to-one based on our interests. So maybe joining some groups, bird watching groups if you're anything like me, but whatever the young person's into. And another suggestion is really to understand and focus on regulation. And my colleague Kay has done some sessions on that, and there's some more information on our website if that's of interest. Okay, so Warda, another question we've had in: do you have any tips on centering lived experience when so much kind of academia and research, which is often not involving or centered on lived experience, informs policy and procedure? Do you have any thoughts around how we can shift the focus and the
This is
what we value?
this is really difficult, because we know how this works. We know that research informs policy, informs funding, informs so many different things, and often as autistic people or minoritized people, we're completely left out of that conversation, and we have been for so many years. I think now, and I hope I'm right in saying that, there feels like there's a bit of a zeitgeist in which the centering of the lived experience of the lived person is really gaining traction. And I can see the shift in academia personally for me. I have noticed that some of the students that I train and educate are much more far ahead in terms of these thoughts and these thinkings and these ideas than even sometimes I am. So I wonder if society, hopefully, with the younger generations coming in, is changing. But also having these partnerships that you talk about, Jill, partnerships, community, collective people getting together, collective evidence base, and subverting from that our lived experiences and testimonies are evidence based. If you look at the global south, and you think about the research and the stuff that comes out of the global south, we've been talking about storytelling and how important it is in so many different ways. So these things are valid. I think from the Eurocentric perspective and lens of even the autism movement in the global north is severely limited in its scope of thinking and practice. And so I think it's hard, because sometimes then people say, well, where's the evidence for this? But you have to remember that, you know, the people that are saying that they hold the evidence base, or they have the research, they're in positions of power and have been put there. But there's power in numbers, there's power in strength, there's power in community. We may not be able to fully shift the dial, but small changes, like me practicing how I practice, Jill doing the work she's doing, other people doing these little bits of work, they do come together for a collective tapestry. They're not easy fixes, and they're really difficult, but it does happen.
Thanks, Warda. Okay, I think I've got time for one last question. So you described the safety that you found in masking and compliance, and also in going with the available crowd, and I so identified with that descriptor. Thank you for that. How can we identify and support other children and young people in this situation?
I think this is where the lived experience really helps. Like for me, intuitively, I can see things because I've been through them myself, where another practitioner couldn't. And so this is why we need autistic people in all these different spaces. I like, you know, autistic speech language therapists, educate, because in some ways we have this intuitive ability to be like, I know what that is, or I know how that feels like. And I think that makes a real difference, that kind of representation, and knowing that we have yeah, that's, I mean, but also, even if you're not autistic and you're working with people, you know, like this story that I'm sharing with you now, don't forget it, take it with you, let it simmer, let it resonate. Yeah. And then think about children in your setting that, you know, may have a similar profile to me, and then just, you know, just and think, do you know, it's so funny because I don't feel like there are any answers or toolboxes for these conversations that we're having. But what I do know is asking questions, thinking together, practicing community, partnerships, conversations. All these things are part of the answer, but I don't know what the answer is.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Warda. Is there any other reflections or anything you want to add before we finish?
No, just thank you so much, Jill and Tom and Becca and everybody else that I haven't mentioned their name, for really working hard and putting this on. I think it's so important, and I think we need these spaces, and this is a space that I wish I had when I was younger, or I wish people that were educating me had access to these kinds of conversations and talks, because maybe things would have been a little bit different for me then. So thank you so much, and thank you to everybody that's turned up as well. Really appreciate it.
Wonderful. What a great way to close our summit. I'm so grateful for your involvement and the partnership that we have. I'm afraid that is all we have time for, folks. So thank you again to Warda and to everybody that's attended. I also want to say a big thank you to Tom and Becca, who have done an incredible amount of work to make this summit possible, and many other colleagues as well who've contributed across the week and the months leading up to this week. We really hope you've enjoyed this webinar. It's the last in the series as part of the Grooming and Coercive Control Summit 2023.
Mm-hmm.
We've added a link to a feedback form in the Zoom chat. We'd be really, really grateful if you can take a few moments to fill this out. We're a new organisation. This is our first ever event series. So your reflections and comments are really important to shaping our future work. If you feel affected by the issues discussed today, in the Zoom chat, you'll also find a link to a list of support organisations. You can also find this at the bottom of the email from us that contain the link to the webinar. It's been a real pleasure hosting you today. We're Neurodiverse Connection. You can find us at ndconnection.co.uk. Follow us on Twitter at ndconnectionuk and find us on LinkedIn. Again, Thanks very much for joining us and take care.